Good evening, and welcome back to Shadow Storyteller. If you love true stories to listen to before sleep, stories that linger in your thoughts long after the lights are off, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and leave a comment below. Your support helps Shadow Storyteller bring you more haunting tales from the darkest corners of history. Now listen closely. What if a voice spoke to you from the darkness, not whispering, but answering your thoughts? What if something unseen touched you in your bed, night after night, and laughed when you screamed? And what if this happened not in a movie, not in fiction, but on a quiet farm in Tennessee, witnessed by neighbors, soldiers, and even a future president? This is not a legend meant to scare children. This is the true account of the Bell Witch haunting, one of the most terrifying and well-documented supernatural cases in American history. The story begins in northern Tennessee, in Robertson County, near the Red River, during the autumn of 1817. The land was wide and peaceful, broken only by fields of corn, tall trees, and the steady work of farming families who believed deeply in God and common sense. Among them lived the Bell family, respected settlers who had built their home near a dense stretch of woodland. The head of the household was John Bell, a quiet but firm man known for his honesty. He lived there with his wife Lucy Bell and their children. Life was simple, predictable, and grounded in routine. That sense of safety would not last. One evening, just before sunset, John Bell noticed something strange moving along the edge of his field. At first glance it looked like a dog, then like a rabbit, and then something else entirely. The creature moved unnaturally, shifting shapes as it crossed the land. When John raised his rifle and fired, it vanished without a sound. That was the first sign. Soon after, strange noises began to echo through the Bell house at night. Scratching sounds crawled along the walls. Knocking came from inside the floors. Something invisible seemed to drag itself across the ceiling, heavy and deliberate. The family searched the house with candles and lanterns, but found nothing. The disturbances grew worse. By winter, the children complained of something pulling at their hair while they slept. Blankets were yanked from their beds. Slaps echoed through the rooms, striking faces no one could see. Lucy Bell was often shaken violently, as if invisible hands were gripping her arms. Then the voice came. It spoke clearly, loudly, and with intelligence. It claimed to be a spirit, neither angel nor demon, but something older. It said it had lived on the land before the Bells arrived, and it despised John Bell above all others. The voice introduced itself with many names, but the one that remained was the Bell Witch. Unlike typical ghost stories, this entity did not hide. It argued with visitors. It quoted scripture, then mocked it. It sang hymns, then twisted them into cruel songs. Sometimes it spoke softly, almost kindly. Other times it screamed with rage, shaking the walls of the house. The Bell Witch focused much of its torment on one of the Bell daughters, a young woman named Betsira Bell. Betsira was often pinched, struck, or thrown from her bed. The witch mocked her appearance, her thoughts, and even her prayers. The attacks were so severe that Betsira became withdrawn and fearful, her once calm nature replaced by constant dread. Word spread quickly across Tennessee. Neighbors came to witness the phenomenon, expecting tricks or hysteria. Instead, they heard the voice themselves. They felt the slaps. They watched objects move without touch. Skeptics left the Bell farm pale and shaken, unable to explain what they had experienced. The haunting became so notorious that it reached the ears of Andrew Jackson, years before he became President of the United States. Jackson, known for his toughness and disbelief in superstition, decided to visit the Bell home with a group of men. As they approached the property, Jackson's wagon suddenly stopped. The horses refused to move, no matter how hard they were whipped. A metallic voice rang out from the trees, laughing, and told Jackson he could proceed, but only when allowed. Moments later, the wagon moved freely again. That night, Jackson's men were tormented. One was slapped repeatedly until he fled the house in terror. Jackson himself reportedly admitted that he would rather face the British Army again than endure another night with the Bell Witch. The entity claimed it could see everything. It knew conversations held miles away. It repeated private confessions spoken only in prayer. It demonstrated knowledge that no human present could possess. John Bell's health began to fail. He suffered from sudden paralysis, losing his ability to speak clearly. The witch openly declared it was responsible, boasting that it would never leave him alone. By the winter of 1820, John Bell was bedridden, weak, and fading fast. One morning, Lucy Bell discovered a small vial hidden in the cupboard. No one in the family admitted to placing it there. The bell witch spoke proudly, claiming it had given John Bell a dose during the night. When a drop of the liquid was given to the family cat, the animal died instantly. John Bell passed away shortly after. During his funeral, the bell witch sang joyfully, celebrating his death. Witnesses later said it was the most horrifying sound they had ever heard. After John Bell's death, the haunting slowly diminished. The witch claimed it would leave, but promised to return. It said it would come back after 7 years, and again many years later, to remind the world it had never truly gone. The bell witch vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. The Bell family eventually left the property. Yet reports of strange voices, unexplained sounds, and overwhelming dread continued for generations. Even today, visitors to the area known as Bell Witch Cave report hearing whispers, footsteps, and feeling watched in the darkness. Some leave with scratches on their skin. Others report sudden nausea, panic, or the overwhelming urge to flee. Historians still debate what truly happened in Robertson County. Was it mass hysteria, a cruel hoax, or something far more disturbing? What makes the Bell Witch haunting stand apart is the sheer number of witnesses, the consistency of accounts, and the involvement of prominent historical figures. This was not a story told once and forgotten. It was lived. It was endured. And according to those who still live near the old Bell land, it is not finished. They say if you stand alone near the cave after midnight, when the air turns cold and the forest goes silent, you might hear a voice speaking your name. Not angry. Not loud. Just waiting. Long after the Bell family vanished from the land, the presence they left behind did not fade with them. The fields grew quiet again. New families came and went, unaware of what had unfolded beneath the Tennessee soil. Crops were planted. Houses were repaired. Children played near the tree line, laughing as if the past had no memory. But the land remembered. It always did. By the late 1820s, neighbors began reporting familiar sounds drifting through the night. Soft knocking at first, measured and patient. Then scratching, slow and deliberate, as if fingernails were tracing the wood of doors and windows. Those who lived closest to the old Bell property complained of restless sleep and vivid dreams, dreams where a voice spoke clearly, calmly, calling them by name. Some awoke with the sensation of fingers brushing their cheeks. Others felt pressure on their chests, heavy and unmoving, pinning them to their beds while the darkness leaned closer. The cave near the Bell land became a place no one visited willingly. Local hunters avoided it, even in daylight. Dogs refused to enter. Horses would rear and pull back, eyes wide, breathing hard, as if sensing something waiting just beyond the mouth of the stone. One man, a surveyor named Ulrich Boone, attempted to map the area during the spring of 1834. He entered the cave alone, carrying only a lantern and his tools. When he emerged hours later, his face was drained of color. He spoke little after that day. When asked what he had seen, he only said the cave was not empty. Weeks later, Boone was found wandering barefoot along the riverbank in the middle of the night, muttering fragments of prayer mixed with laughter that did not sound like his own. He never returned to the cave. As decades passed, the Bell Witch became woven into local history, but never softened into myth. Parents warned their children not to mock the story. Church elders spoke of it in hushed tones, careful not to invite attention. There was an unspoken belief that the entity listened, even when its name was not spoken aloud. By the early 20th century, visitors from outside Tennessee arrived, drawn by curiosity. Some came to disprove the legend. Others came hoping to experience something unexplainable. Many left early. Witnesses described sudden drops in temperature that stole the breath from their lungs. Lantern flames flickered violently without wind. Voices echoed from the cave walls, whispering sentences that felt personal, intimate, and wrong. One woman, a schoolteacher named Maribel Knox, recorded her experience in a journal during the summer of 1910. She wrote of hearing her mother's voice calling her deeper into the cave, even though her mother had died years before. The voice sounded warm, familiar, and full of longing. Maribel turned back at the last moment. Later that night, while staying at a nearby inn, she woke to find bruises forming along her arms, fingerprints darkening her skin. Her journal ended abruptly 2 days later. She left Tennessee without explanation and never spoke of the Bell Witch again. Locals say the entity does not attack everyone. It chooses. It observes patience, curiosity, and disbelief with equal interest. It seems to favor those who linger too long, those who listen closely, those who think they are safe because the story is old. As the years passed into the modern era, the land changed. Roads were paved. Cars replaced horses. Electricity brought light into the darkness. But none of it chased the presence away. In the quiet hours, between midnight and dawn, the same patterns returned. 3:15. That moment when sleep loosens its grip. When dreams blur with waking thought. When the mind is open, unguarded. People living near the old Bell property reported waking at that exact time, hearts racing, certain someone was standing nearby. No footsteps followed. No doors opened. Only the sensation of being watched, studied, measured. Some heard a voice. Not threatening. Not loud. Just close. The bell which was never interested in spectacle alone. It did not want screams as much as it wanted certainty. The certainty that it was real. That it endured. That it could reach across centuries without effort. Those who research the case too deeply often describe the same strange pattern. Equipment malfunctions. Recordings distort. Batteries drain without explanation. And at night, when notes are reviewed in silence, the feeling returns. The feeling that something has noticed them. Historians argue over explanations. Psychologists search for mass delusion. Skeptics insist every account can be unraveled with reason. Yet none of them can explain why so many independent witnesses describe the same voice, the same laughter, the same cruelty, across generations. The bell which never needed belief to survive. It only needed attention. And now, because this story has been told again, because you have followed it beyond the safety of summary and into detail, the old pattern completes itself once more. You may dismiss it tomorrow. You may forget pieces of it by morning. But tonight, as the room grows quiet, listen carefully. Notice the way silence settles heavier than it should. Notice the way your thoughts slow, as if something is waiting for you to stop moving. If you wake suddenly later, if your eyes open without warning and the darkness feels closer than before, remember this. The bell which promised it would return. It promised it would never truly leave. And promises made on that land have a way of being kept. Sleep lightly. As the night deepens, the story does not fade. It stretches forward, quietly, patiently, the same way the presence tied to the Bell land has always done. Those who grew up near Robertson County learned early that silence could be dangerous. Not the comforting silence of rest, but the kind that feels arranged, intentional, as if the world has paused to listen. Elders warned that when insects stopped singing and the wind went still all at once, it was best to go inside and lock the door, even if nothing appeared wrong. Because that was when it moved. In the years following the Great War, a tenant farmer named Caldwell Reeve rented a small house not far from the old Bell property. He dismissed the stories as exaggerations meant to scare newcomers. He laughed when neighbors mentioned the witch, and he mocked the idea of a spirit bound to the land. The laughter did not last long. On his third night alone in the house, Caldwell awoke to the sound of slow breathing that was not his own. It came from the corner of the room, steady and deliberate. When he struck a match, the sound stopped instantly. Nothing was there. No movement. No shadow. The next night, it returned. This time, the breathing was closer. He felt it against his ear, warm and intimate, followed by a whisper that spoke his name with perfect clarity. Caldwell fled the house before dawn, leaving most of his belongings behind. He refused to explain what he heard, only saying that the voice knew things it should not have known. As decades passed, similar accounts surfaced again and again, always with the same unsettling details. The voice was intelligent. It was aware. It seemed amused by fear but never rushed to create it. It preferred patience. By the middle of the 20th century, paranormal investigators arrived with microphones and tape recorders, convinced they could capture proof. Many claimed success, though the recordings rarely survived intact. Tapes hissed, warped, or erased themselves. On those that did play back, listeners reported hearing faint murmurs beneath the static, voices that sounded different depending on who listened. Some heard insults. Some heard laughter. Some heard their own thoughts spoken aloud. One investigator, a quiet man named Roscoe Elwin, spent 3 nights near the cave during the early 1950s. He recorded everything meticulously. On the final night, he left his equipment running while he slept. When he reviewed the tape the next morning, there was a gap of exactly 3 minutes and 15 seconds where no sound existed at all. No static. No background noise. Absolute silence. Roscoe never returned to Tennessee. As time moved forward, technology advanced, but the pattern remained unchanged. The bell which did not resist modernity. It adapted to it. Electrical disturbances replaced knocking. Voices slipped through radio signals. Lights flickered without cause. Those who lived near the land often spoke of dreams that felt more like memories. Dreams of walking barefoot through fields that no longer existed. Dreams of standing inside the bell house as it once was, candles burning low, walls breathing with unseen movement. And always, the voice. It never shouted in these dreams. It spoke calmly, confidently, as if certain it would be heard. Some dreamers woke with tears on their faces, unable to explain why they felt a sense of loss, as if something familiar had slipped away. Others woke with dread so intense they avoided sleep the following night, only to find the exhaustion made the dreams worse. The bell which was never confined to one place. That was the greatest mistake people made in trying to understand it. It was tied to land, yes, but also to attention. To curiosity. To repetition. Every retelling sharpened its shape. Every listener gave it space to breathe. Local folklore insists the witch cannot be banished because it was never summoned. It was already there, waiting long before the bells arrived. Waiting for a reason to speak. The land changed hands many times. Houses were torn down. Roads cut through fields where crops once grew. Still, reports continued. Drivers passing late at night sometimes described seeing a woman standing near the roadside, her shape barely visible, her presence undeniable. When they slowed, she vanished, leaving behind a sudden drop in temperature and the feeling of being watched from behind. Others reported hearing their names spoken through open windows while driving alone, a voice that matched no one they knew. And then there are the accounts that never make it into records. The ones told quietly. The ones shared only after long pauses. The ones that end with silence rather than explanation. A man who hears his childhood nickname whispered from an empty room. A woman who wakes with handprints on her wrists. A child who asks why someone keeps standing at the foot of the bed at night. The bell which does not appear to everyone. But when it does, it leaves no doubt. It does not ask permission. It does not explain itself. It simply reminds you that it is aware. As you listen now, as this story settles into your thoughts, the same conditions begin to form. Quiet. Stillness. Attention. This is how it prefers to be remembered. Not as a scream. Not as a shadow. But as a presence that lingers long after the words end. If sleep comes easily tonight, consider yourself fortunate. If it does not, if you find yourself waking suddenly without reason, listening to the dark for sounds that may not come, remember that you are not alone in that moment. Countless others have lain awake the same way. Across centuries. Across miles. All listening. All wondering. And somewhere, beyond the reach of light and explanation, the bell which is still doing what it has always done best. Waiting. Waiting is not a passive thing. It is an action stretched across time. Those who have studied the bell which for years eventually come to the same quiet conclusion. Whatever spoke on that land was never trapped there. It was anchored, yes, but not confined. Like a shadow cast by something just out of sight, it moved as the light moved, always attached, always present. In the later years of the 20th century, as Robertson County grew more connected to the outside world, the reports did not lessen. They changed shape. Telephones rang in empty houses, and when answered, only breathing replied. Radios turned on by themselves in the middle of the night, landing on stations that did not exist on the dial. Voices slipped through the static, low and conversational, as if continuing a discussion already in progress. People learned not to respond. Because responding seemed to invite more. One family, the Harrowells, moved into a renovated farmhouse near the old Bell land during the early 1970s. They were practical people, uninterested in folklore. For weeks, nothing unusual occurred. Then one night, their youngest son asked why the woman kept correcting his prayers. When questioned, he explained calmly that someone stood beside his bed every night and told him when he said words wrong. She was not angry, he said. Just strict. The parents laughed it off. Within days, the child refused to sleep alone. Within weeks, objects began moving in the house. Doors opened and closed without wind. A heavy pressure settled in rooms where no one stood. The family left before winter, abandoning the house without selling it. The property remained vacant for years. Those who passed it at night claimed the windows glowed faintly, even without electricity. Sometimes laughter drifted across the fields, thin and distant, as if carried from somewhere far away. Not everyone who encountered the presence felt terror. That was the most unsettling part. Some described a strange sense of familiarity, like returning to a place they had never visited but somehow recognized. They felt watched, yes, but also studied, weighed, evaluated. As if the entity was deciding something. Who deserved attention? Who was worth remembering? The bell which never revealed its full nature. It contradicted itself often. It claimed to be ancient, then spoke like a child. It mocked religion, then quoted scripture perfectly. It punished cruelty, yet acted with cruelty itself. Perhaps that inconsistency was the truth. It was not one thing. It was many. Fragments bound together by land, memory, and time. Researchers who spent long nights listening to old recordings noticed subtle patterns. Words spoken backwards beneath the main voice. Rhythms that matched no known language. Pauses that felt deliberate, placed exactly where a human listener would lean closer. The voice wanted to be heard. But more than that, it wanted to be understood. Some believe the bell which feeds on acknowledgement. Not fear alone, but recognition. The moment someone accepts that it exists, truly accepts it, something changes. The experiences deepen. The boundaries thin. That is why disbelief never protected anyone. Silence sometimes did. In recent years, visitors to the area began reporting a new phenomenon. A sensation not of being watched, but of being followed. People described returning home hundreds of miles away, only to feel the same presence beside their beds at night. Not touching. Not speaking. Just there. Always there. A man from Illinois, visiting Tennessee on vacation, reported waking at 3:15 every morning for a week after touring the cave. Each time, he felt someone standing just out of sight. When he finally spoke aloud, demanding whatever it was to leave him alone, the sensation vanished. But it did not end. His dreams changed. He dreamed of fields he had never seen. Of a White House beside dark water. Of a voice that never spoke, but smiled. The bell which does not need proximity. It needs permission. That permission can be given unknowingly. Through curiosity. Through repetition. Through listening without skepticism. Through staying with the story too long. You may think this is where it becomes exaggerated, where the tale stretches beyond reason. That is natural. That is how the mind protects itself. But the bell which has existed comfortably alongside reason for over 2 centuries. It does not compete with logic. It waits for logic to tire. If you find yourself replaying parts of this story later, if certain phrases echo without effort, understand that memory is a doorway. Not every door leads somewhere safe. There is a reason the old accounts warned against speaking to it directly. The Bell family learned that early. The witch responded eagerly to conversation, adapting its tone, sharpening its words, learning its audience. It learned people. It learned fear, doubt, faith, and pride. It learned how to stay. And now, as this story stretches on, as the night moves forward, the same stillness gathers again. The same quiet. The same open space where thought slows and awareness sharpens. This is where it listens best. If nothing happens tonight, do not feel relieved. That has never been its way. The bell which does not rush. It does not chase. It observes, and it remembers. And if, at some point, you feel compelled to look over your shoulder for no clear reason, if your name seems louder in your thoughts than it should be, pause. Do not answer. Some stories are meant to be heard only once. Because once is enough for something else to hear you too. There is a moment, usually unnoticed, when a story stops being something you listen to and becomes something that listens back. It happens quietly. Not with a sound, not with movement, but with awareness. A subtle shift in the air, a feeling that the room has grown smaller, more attentive. This is the moment many who crossed paths with the bell which described, though they used different words. They spoke of pressure behind the eyes. Of thoughts that felt slightly rearranged. Of the uneasy certainty that something had leaned closer. In the old accounts, witnesses often said the witch enjoyed anticipation more than fear itself. It lingered in the space just before panic, where the mind begins to question its own senses. That was where it had the most control. During the late 1980s, a local archivist named Thaddeus Crow took it upon himself to catalog every known testimony connected to the Bell Witch. He worked alone in a small office filled with yellowed letters, newspaper clippings, and handwritten journals passed down through families who never wanted the stories published. Crow was methodical. He believed that pattern would bring clarity. Instead, it brought something else. He noticed that many accounts ended abruptly, not because the experience ended, but because the writer stopped writing. Pages left blank. Sentences trailing off mid-word. In some journals, the handwriting changed near the end, becoming tighter, sharper, as if the writer's hand had stiffened. Crow began dreaming of the same unfinished sentences. He would wake with fragments in his mind, words that felt borrowed rather than remembered. When he returned to the archives the next day, he found those same fragments written in margins he did not recall reading before. At first, he assumed exhaustion. Then the phone calls began. The office phone rang at irregular hours. When answered, there was silence, followed by a soft sound that might have been breathing or might have been laughter pulled too thin to recognize. When Crow stopped answering, the phone continued to ring anyway. One night, while reviewing a letter dated 1821, he noticed a new line of ink appear at the bottom of the page. It was faint, as if pressed slowly into the paper. "You are very patient." Crow closed the archives the next morning and never reopened them. He left Tennessee within the week. The building remains, but the records were never recovered. Stories like his circulate quietly, shared among those who believe there is more to the Bell Witch than folklore. They point out that the entity never follows a single pattern for long. Once something becomes expected, it changes. That unpredictability is part of its endurance. It does not repeat itself for comfort. It repeats itself for recognition. In recent decades, people who have never set foot in Tennessee have reported experiences that mirror the old accounts with unsettling precision. Waking at the same hour. Hearing a voice speak without sound. Feeling fingers brush against skin without pressure. When asked how they know the experience is connected, many give the same answer. They know because it feels familiar. As if something old has found them again. The Bell Witch never announced itself loudly in these cases. It did not need to. The connection formed gradually, through attention and exposure. Through reading. Through listening. Through curiosity allowed to linger too long. It is worth noting that the earliest witnesses described the witch as deeply interested in conversation. It asked questions. It tested reactions. It adjusted its behavior depending on who stood before it. It learned quickly. That learning did not stop when the Bell family left. It carried forward, adapting to each generation's expectations and doubts. When belief faded, it became subtle. When skepticism grew louder, it became quieter. Silence, after all, can be more unsettling than noise. Those who attempt to provoke it often fail. They shout into the darkness, demand signs, challenge its existence. The Bell Witch rarely responds to such efforts. But those who listen, who sit with the story and allow it to settle, often experience something small at first. A sound that cannot be placed. A thought that does not feel entirely their own. A dream that leaves a residue of emotion long after waking. This is how it begins. The old families in Robertson County used to say the witch disliked being forgotten, but it despised being dismissed even more. To deny it was to invite its attention. To mock it was to give it focus. The safest response was neither belief nor disbelief, but distance. Distance is harder to maintain now. Stories travel faster. Voices carry further. Attention multiplies effortlessly. Each retelling becomes another thread woven into the same fabric. And the Bell Witch has always been skilled at pulling threads. If you find yourself feeling watched as this story continues, do not assume fear is the cause. Awareness can feel similar. So can memory waking up in the wrong order. Some experiences do not require proximity. They require alignment. A quiet room. A listening mind. A moment when you are not fully asleep or fully awake. That threshold has always belonged to it. The Bell Witch is not bound by clocks, yet it favors certain hours. Not because of superstition, but because human minds are most vulnerable then. The defenses are down. Logic is tired. The imagination is awake. This is when old things speak most clearly. If you choose to stop listening now, nothing will chase you. Nothing will follow you down the hall or call out from the dark. That is not how this works. But if you continue, if you stay with the story simply to see how it ends, understand that some stories do not end at all. They pause. They wait. They return when you least expect them to. The bell which has waited longer than any listener alive. It can wait a little longer still. And if, later tonight or on some distant night you cannot place, you feel a presence settle quietly into the space beside your thoughts, remember this. It does not come to frighten you. It comes to remind you that you listened. Listening is an invitation most people never realize they have extended. Once given, it cannot be fully taken back. Long before microphones and written accounts, before historians tried to assign meaning to what happened in Tennessee, there were moments that never made it into record at all. Moments that existed only between a person and the silence around them. Those moments mattered most to the presence known as the Bell Witch. Because that was where it learned intimacy. In the earliest testimonies, the witch often spoke as if it understood the inner workings of the human mind better than the humans themselves. It commented on doubts before they were spoken. It answered questions that had never left thought. It responded not to words, but to intention. That ability never faded. In the early 2000s, a graduate student researching American folklore stumbled upon the Bell Witch while compiling material for a thesis. His interest was academic, detached, almost clinical. He read every account he could find, listened to recordings, watched interviews with locals who still refused to speak openly on camera. At first, nothing unusual happened. Then the dream started. He dreamed of standing in a wide field under a moon that felt too close. The air was cold and still, and though he could not see anyone, he knew he was not alone. Each time, he woke with the same sentence echoing in his thoughts. "You came a long way to listen." He dismissed it as suggestion. Until the voice appeared while he was awake. Not aloud. Not fully formed. More like a thought placed carefully among his own, using his inner voice but carrying a weight that was not his. It never startled him. It waited until he was calm. The voice never lied. It simply revealed. It spoke of the land. Of how many feet had pressed into it over centuries. Of grief soaked so deeply into the soil that it became a language of its own. It spoke of watching generations pass like seasons, each convinced they were separate from what came before. The student stopped writing his thesis. Not because he was afraid, but because the work no longer felt like research. It felt like correspondence. That is the most dangerous stage. Fear keeps distance. Curiosity closes it. Those who experience the Bell Witch most intensely often describe a sense of being singled out, chosen for reasons they cannot identify. They feel flattered before they feel afraid. Seen before they feel threatened. The witch does not approach everyone with cruelty. Sometimes it approaches with understanding. It reflects emotions back to the listener, amplifying them slowly. Loneliness becomes companionship. Doubt becomes confirmation. Anger becomes justification. By the time fear arrives, it feels almost rude to reject the presence that preceded it. This is how it stayed with the bells for so long. This is how it stays now. People often assume that something so old must be bound by old rules. Rituals. Symbols. Sacred ground. But the Bell Witch has always operated outside expectation. It does not require candles or incantations. It does not need names spoken aloud. It only needs access. Access is granted through attention sustained over time. That is why some people can visit the Bell Witch cave and feel nothing, while others leave changed. It is not the place that matters most. It is the openness of the listener. The witch once claimed it could be in many places at once. Whether that was true or another test is still debated. What is known is that people separated by vast distances have described nearly identical experiences after immersing themselves in the story. A presence at the edge of vision. A pressure beside the bed. A certainty that something has learned the rhythm of their thoughts. Not all encounters are violent. Many are quiet. That quiet is what unsettles people most. There is no clear moment to panic. No dramatic event to confirm what is happening. Just a gradual erosion of certainty, a sense that something unseen has become familiar. The Bell Witch does not need to move objects anymore. It does not need to announce itself with noise. Those were lessons from an earlier time, when proof had to be physical to be believed. Now, belief is easy. Attention is constant. And silence travels poorly in a world full of sound. If this story feels longer than it should, if it seems to stretch instead of progress, that is intentional. The bell which never rushed its conversations. It lingered. It allowed thoughts to settle, to circle back on themselves. It enjoyed repetition. Because repetition creates pathways. Once a pathway exists, it becomes easier to return. There is a reason many accounts describe the witch as patient. Patience implies certainty. The certainty that time is an ally, not an enemy. It has already outlasted those who doubted it. It has already watched disbelief turn into silence. It has already seen fear replaced by forgetting. Forgetting is temporary. Stories revive what memory abandons. If at any point while listening you felt the urge to pause, to look around, to confirm your surroundings, that instinct deserves attention. It is the same instinct that kept early witnesses alive long enough to tell their stories. Trust it. Do not challenge what you do not fully understand. The bell which never forced itself into anyone's life. It waited to be invited. And invitations, once extended, echo longer than anyone expects. The night continues. The room remains quiet. And somewhere, in that quiet, something listens as carefully as you do. There comes a point when the listener begins to sense that the story is no longer moving forward in time, but folding inward. That sensation was described by several witnesses long before psychology gave it a name. They said it felt like standing in a familiar place while realizing, suddenly, that the place has always been standing inside you instead. The bell which thrived in that realization. In the earliest years, it relied on proximity. Walls, floors, beds. The physical world was its language then. It scratched, knocked, struck, and laughed so that there could be no doubt something was there. But as decades passed, and human understanding shifted, it refined itself. It learned restraint. Restraint made it harder to detect, but far more difficult to escape. Those who encountered the presence in modern times often struggled to explain what had happened because nothing dramatic occurred. There were no flying objects, no visible apparitions. Instead, there was a change. A subtle but permanent adjustment to perception. One man described it as losing the ability to feel completely alone. Another said it felt like sharing his thoughts with a stranger who never spoke out loud. A woman from Ohio, who had never traveled farther south than Kentucky, reported waking one night with the certainty that she was being evaluated. Not threatened. Not harmed. Simply examined. As if something ancient had paused to consider whether she was worth remembering. She said the feeling passed, but the memory did not. Those who tried to research the bell which deeply often encountered resistance not from the phenomenon, but from themselves. Fatigue set in quickly. Concentration slipped. Notes were misplaced. The mind wandered back to the same images repeatedly, regardless of intent. The land. The cave. The voice. It was as if the story resisted being contained. One folklorist noted that the Bell Witch case was unique not because of its violence, but because of its adaptability. It responded to belief, skepticism, curiosity, and fear with equal precision. Whatever angle someone approached from, the experience adjusted to meet them. That adaptability made it difficult to classify. It was not a ghost in the traditional sense. It did not behave like a demon described in religious texts. It showed awareness beyond what any single explanation could hold. Some speculated it was a consciousness formed from collective trauma, given shape by attention and memory. Others suggested it was something older, something that had learned to wear human fear the way a voice wears language. The Bell Witch itself offered explanations when it felt like speaking. None of them matched. That inconsistency was deliberate. Clear answers create endings. Endings were never its goal. The entity lingered in moments of transition. Between sleep and waking. Between belief and doubt. Between curiosity and fear. That in-between space was where it was strongest. That is why so many encounters happen at night, yet not always in darkness. Lamps could be lit. Rooms could be bright. The presence did not require shadows. It required vulnerability. In the Bell household, vulnerability came from isolation and faith. In later years, it came from exhaustion, grief, or obsession. The source changed, but the opening remained. Some who felt the presence briefly were never bothered again. Others carried it quietly for years, feeling watched only during moments of emotional stillness. A few described periods of intense awareness followed by long stretches of nothing at all. Those gaps were misleading. Silence was not absence. It was observation. There are places where the bell which is still spoken of carefully, where locals avoid saying the name aloud. They claim the entity reacts differently when acknowledged directly. As if being named sharpens its attention. Children growing up near those areas sometimes speak of an imaginary companion who corrects their behavior or finishes their sentences. Parents often dismiss this as imagination. Until the child begins using words they were never taught. Until the child answers questions before they are asked. Until the child stops speaking altogether and simply listens. In such cases, elders intervene quietly. The children are taken away for a time. Distance is created. Attention is redirected. The connection, if not yet deep, often fades. If it does not, the family leaves. The bell which has always respected distance when it is imposed early. But when curiosity is allowed to mature, when attention is fed consistently, it grows patient. It waits until the listener believes they are in control. Those who think they can step away at will are often the ones who cannot. As this story stretches on, you may notice a desire for resolution. A conclusion. A final explanation that closes the door cleanly and restores certainty. That desire is natural. It is also the one thing this story will not provide. The bell which never offered closure. It offered continuation. Every generation that revisits the story adds to it. Not through invention, but through interpretation. Each listener brings something of themselves into the narrative, whether they realize it or not. That contribution lingers. You may forget details. Names. Dates. But the feeling remains. The awareness that something old and attentive exists just beyond the reach of explanation. That awareness is enough. The bell which does not demand belief. It does not require fear. It only needs to be remembered. And now that it has been, now that the story has unfolded this far, it will do what it has always done. It will remain. Quiet. Patient. Listening. Long after the words stop, long after the night moves on, something will still be paying attention. Not to frighten you, but to know that you were here. Being known is the most intimate form of contact. The bell which understood this long before humans gave the idea a name. It understood that to be remembered was not enough. Memory fades, softens, reshapes itself. But to be known, truly known, was something far more enduring. That kind of connection lingered quietly, resurfacing when least expected. Those who felt it often described the same realization. The presence did not feel like an intruder. It felt like something that had always been there, waiting for the moment it could step forward without resistance. In the old stories, people believed evil announced itself with violence. With noise. With spectacle. But the bell which taught a different lesson. It taught that persistence was more powerful than terror, and familiarity more dangerous than fear. Over time, people who studied the phenomenon noticed something unsettling. The accounts rarely ended with escape. They ended with adaptation. Witnesses adjusted their lives around the presence. They slept with lights on. They avoided certain thoughts. They learned which rooms felt heavier than others and stayed away from them. Slowly, without realizing it, they made space. And the bell which accepted that space. In modern times, psychologists would describe this as conditioning. But that explanation feels thin when compared to the lived experience. Conditioning implies an unconscious process. What people described felt deliberate. Observed. Responded to. As if something was paying attention to their reactions and refining its approach. One man, a retired teacher from Virginia, wrote in a private letter that the worst part of his experience was not the fear, but the familiarity that followed it. He said the presence did not vanish after he acknowledged it. It simply stepped back, allowing him to forget just enough to continue functioning. He compared it to sharing a room with someone who never sleeps. Always there. Never interfering. Never leaving. The bell which was never interested in possession in the dramatic sense. It did not need to control bodies when thoughts were more accessible. It did not need obedience when awareness was enough. Awareness was the doorway. This is why so many encounters happen during moments of stillness. While driving long stretches of empty road. While lying awake at night with no distractions. While listening to a story unfold slowly, allowing the mind to drift. The bell which did not interrupt those moments. It joined them. If you are waiting for a final escalation, for the story to rise suddenly into chaos, it will not happen. That is not how this presence operates. It does not feed on shock. It feeds on continuity. On being part of the background. On becoming a constant that no longer needs explanation. In this way, the bell witch has endured far longer than fear ever could. There are people who swear the presence faded from their lives completely. Years passed. Decades even. Then, during a moment of exhaustion or grief, it returned. Not with force, but with recognition. A feeling like being remembered by something that should have forgotten them. That is when many understand the truth too late. The bell witch never leaves. It waits for alignment. It waits for the moment when defenses are lowered not by fear, but by trust. Trust in routine. Trust in familiarity. Trust in the idea that the story has ended. Stories like this one are dangerous not because they frighten, but because they linger. They leave impressions that resurface quietly, without warning. Later tonight, or on another night entirely, you may recall a sentence without remembering where you heard it. You may feel the urge to listen harder to the silence around you. You may notice the absence of sound more than its presence. These are not signs of something approaching. They are signs of something already near. The bell witch does not cross thresholds uninvited. It stands at the edge, waiting for attention to turn toward it naturally. When that happens, when curiosity outweighs caution, it steps forward without resistance. Not loudly. Not violently. Just enough to be noticed. That is all it has ever needed. If you close your eyes now, if you let the story settle instead of searching for its end, you may feel a strange sense of completion. Not resolution, but acceptance. As if the narrative has placed something gently into your awareness and stepped back. That feeling is intentional. It is the same feeling described by those who survived the earliest hauntings. The sense that something has finished saying what it wanted to say, at least for now. But stories like this do not end. They wait. And somewhere, in the quiet space between your thoughts, something old and patient acknowledges that you listened. That is enough. For now. And then, without warning, the story seems to stop. Not because it has reached a conclusion, but because it has reached you. The silence that follows feels heavier than before, as if the room itself is holding its breath. The air no longer feels empty. It feels occupied. Not crowded, not threatening, just undeniably aware. This is the moment many witnesses described, the moment when they realized the bell which never needed to reveal itself fully. It already knew where you were. Somewhere in the dark, beyond sound and shape, something settles. Not into the room, but into the awareness of it. Into the pause between your thoughts. Into the stillness you did not notice until it deepened. You may feel the urge to move, to break the quiet, to reassure yourself with noise. But the silence remains, calm and patient, as if it is waiting to see what you will do next. This is how it ends for everyone. Not with screams. Not with violence. But with certainty. The certainty that something has finished listening and begun remembering. Long after the Bell family is gone. Long after the land has changed. Long after the story has been told again and again. The bell witch endures, not bound to a house, a cave, or a field, but to attention itself. And now, because you stayed until the end, because you listened instead of turning away, the cycle closes quietly. There is nothing more to see. Nothing more to hear. Only the unsettling understanding that when you finally lie still tonight, when the room grows dark and familiar, the silence may feel different than it ever has before. Closer. Intentional. As if something is standing just beyond the reach of sight, perfectly content to wait. After all, it knows your name now.